What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek, he's Sodek, and today we have the long-awaited modern metagame update tier list, the first one that we are making post preordain unban, and technically second, but really first that we published after Lord of the Rings. Let's go. Alrighty, so somewhat newish modern is upon us. We've got, as we said, Lord of the Rings, we've got Preordain, we've got Wilds of Eldraine, and while Wilds of Eldraine is not really in any way impactful for modern, I think, or very... I guess there's up the beanstalk. Okay, there is up the beanstalk.
No, there are more cards, more than you think.
Okay, it's less impactful than both Lord of the Rings and Preordain. But yeah, like three big things basically since the last time we published one of those. As I said in the intro, we also recorded one before PT Barcelona, but we didn't have enough data for it, so we made like a vibes based type of tier list that we used to make a long time ago, and it kind of just was lost in the content. We've had a lot of work to do before Barcelona, and then I just forgot to edit it, and like somewhere over like probably Munich or France or whatever, sitting in the plane, I was like, okay, I forgot to do this, and I messaged Sodek, well,
and then
we just don't have it.
Even if we could post it, then the modern metagame changed so fast that it was already outdated a bit.
Yeah, so it was like I was back from Barcelona and we were like, okay, it's after the PT, things have changed, and we have this ban announcement in a second, so things will change again, most likely. So we just decided to roll with it and not post it. But here we are now. I hope you end up watching this on the tail end of this week or next week or whenever you feel like it. But yeah, so as we said, Lord of the Rings Preordain, Wilds of Eldraine. So Sodek, as the adamant defender of Wilds of Eldraine, please tell us which Wilds of Eldraine cards actually changed the format and impacted it. And if you say, not that after all, I will kick you from this call because it's not a change. It's the same card as Feign Death and Undying Malice. Okay,
first of all, not that after all is quite important because the extra losing one life in Scam extremely matters.
Okay, and sometimes this counter will be removed by Prismatic Ending because it has no other target. So
yeah,
it's
that's true. Yeah, like okay, this was kind of joke. Like the card exists and like people are playing 4-offs and etc. But there are two important cards in my opinion. The first one is Up the Beanstalk, right? The 2-mana enchantment.
Yes.
That lets you draw a lot of cards when you are using. Yeah, like it always feels like whenever I talk about something new and cool, it all comes down to evoke elementals, and this is just the same story. Maybe not the same, but very similar. Up the Beanstalk combos quite well with Solitude and Fury, as well as other 5 mana and more mana effects that lets you draw more cards. The important part of the Up the Beanstalk is that it cantrips itself, so you don't have to wait too much or even invest mana without any immediate impact. And it stacks together. So the more Up the Beanstalks you have, the more cards you can draw, then the more free Solitudes and Furies you can play. They draw you even more cards, and so on. So the card is, I don't want to say it's a missing piece, but it surprised me how good it is for color control, because like the deck already had Omnath shell. The deck had already One Ring, and I wasn't that sure if the deck needs even more card advantage.
That's, I think, a very flawed perspective at Up the Beanstalk that many people have, because it's not a card advantage card. It's a draw smoothing card. It's a card that cantrips for 2 mana with an extra value later on. It's basically expressive iteration that plays well with other 4-color cards. It's
Like
not a
Hasbro,
card advantage card. It's a card that will often draws you 2 cards for 2 mana. It's not like this huge engine like One Ring or something.
Like eventually it will be an engine. Like once if it's
at this point you will win the game anyways. It does. What matters is that it's very often I can hit my third land more often, and if I cast one spell, it will change into 2 mana, draw 2, and it's basically expressive iteration in this deck in a way that, like, 4-color incorporated or tried to incorporate expressive iteration many times,
failed, yeah,
and it usually fails. There were some people who tried to push it really, really far with like playing Bubble in 4-color with Unholy Heat back in the day, like with maybe more like Travels the Ulvenwald, Delirium style with Emrakul to beat the mirror, stuff like that, yada yada yada. But basically, expressive iteration is not very good if your cards are so expensive, and Up the Beanstalk is the same thing, give or take, but it works well with, okay, I will draw a card now, but instead of having to play the exiled card this turn, I can get it next turn when I cast my 1 mana Leyline Binding, or even the same turn cycle when I Solitude.
Like I feel that the key part is making the Evoke Elementals not a 2-for-1, but a 1-for-1, or like with Fury 1 for 2 or 3.
I think that
I feel like that's my personal take, that like you need something to like. The biggest downside of Evoke Elementals was in 4-color was if you were forced to use them early before you set up your card advantage engine, you can run out of cards too quickly and not be able to redraw into more landers, etc.
Yes, I think
Up the Beanstalk solves it.
I think Up the Beanstalk can finally get people to cut Ren and 6 from their deck.
What?
And I think that's a good, like, if I was to play this type of deck now, I would try to play like a banned deck. I think that the problem with 4-color, and we had much more 4-color in the last 2 weeks with Up the Beanstalk than before, is because this deck just floods horribly, or it flooded horribly before Up the Beanstalk. Because if your deck is Ren and 6, Delighted Halfling, and 22 lands, it's like half of your deck is mana, and it only gets you more mana, and sometimes it would be great because you play turn 1 Halfling, turn 2 Teferi, or turn 3 Ring, and you'll just win the game. But if your payoff cards are answered, or if you draw those mana, like mana dorks or mana generators in Ren and 6, I guess, later on, this deck is just very prone to flooding, and I think a lot of Up the Beanstalk lists also cut halflings, which I think is a very good direction.
Yeah.
Like you can't play all of those cards, right?
Yeah, Derek. Like I wanted to talk only about new cards and not about 4-color because we'll have time.
Well, we'll talk about 4-color in a second. Doesn't matter in which order we do that.
Okay, sure. Overall, like, it's not even set up how the Up the Beanstalk 4-color should look like, because, for instance, I saw the McQueen Sauce list with Bring to Light, which is, in my opinion, very interesting idea.
Super Qualifier yesterday or 2 days ago was won by 75 cards 4-color.
Yeah, that's
like 75 cards main deck 4-color.
We should just maybe redefine what's like these ideas of playing more than 60 cards were considered super bad for so many years, but maybe nowadays it's not that bad after all.
I think it's a bit better than people. Like, if you take a person from who stopped playing Magic like 10 or 15 years ago and you show them those decks, they will be like, just cut those cards to 60. What the fuck? And I think they would like overvalue or undervalue how good going to more cards is. But I think there's also like there is a reason that for so many years people were so criticized of playing too many lands or too many cards rather. The biggest gain of playing more than 60 cards is that fetch lands mana base scale very well with more lands you add, because you can just add more fetch lands, which are basically 5-color lands. That's the biggest gain of fetch lands, or more cards than 60 with fetch lands. Also, Canister pointed out to me yesterday that if you play 60 cards in those Up the Beanstalk decks, you may just mill yourself. You may just deck somewhat often. That's what he said. I don't know how serious he was about it. Like it wasn't said in like a joking fashion. Like he actually said that, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how much he thought about it or whatever. He spent 1 week in the mountains just thinking about Magic, and I don't know what else. I don't care.
You know, and you want to say once again that up the Beanstalk is not a card advantage spell? You want to say it again? Like, if Up the Beanstalk is here, it draws you so many cards that you can deck yourself. Do you still think that it's not a card advantage spell?
It's
Jędrek,
the same. Like, it is a card advantage spell in the same way as... I'm gonna find a good analogy.
Okay.
And then I will come back with this. Like,
okay.
Its value is not being a card advantage spell.
Okay. Maybe it's a model card then. Value card earlier, and card advantage later on. Maybe
value and card advantage is the same thing.
No.
Yes, it is the same thing in this case.
So Up the Beanstalk is...
Up the Beanstalk is... It's a draw smoothing card. I think its main purpose, and it's by far the most important one, it's like Think Twice. It's basically Think Twice. And Think Twice is basically iteration. It's the same type of card.
I remember when I compared Priced Amalgam to White Knuckle, and like the fact that they both are 3/3 does not mean that they are very similar to each other. And this is
it's the same type of card. You were using Think Twice for years to hit your land drops, and you will use Up the Beanstalk to hit your land drops.
Jędrek, please.
No, it's the same thing.
No, because you spend mana to draw more cards on Thinkwise and do it only
Of course, the rate is
up.
better or Up the Beanstalk. I'm not saying Up the Beanstalk is the same power level as Think Twice. It's the same. It serves the same purpose as Think Twice. You use it to smooth your draws.
Okay, maybe maybe the viewers will think who's right here, and let's go to the other card that saw a lot of play, much more play than I expected to see. It means it's Agatha's Soul Cauldron.
Oh, yeah.
The 2-mana legendary artifact that does a lot of things. Long story short, each creature with +1/+1 counters has the abilities of the exiled card, and if you tap it, you can exile the card from the graveyard if it's a creature. Okay, when the creature cards is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. So technically, it's a strange graveyard height effect.
It's a half of an unlicensed hearse.
Yeah, that gives you counters and gets you abilities. And getting these abilities is super scary and tricky, because I saw there are two decks that are using it. The first one is quite obviously Yavmot. And
I think the second one is more obvious if you think about the card. And the first deck that comes to mind when I saw it, it's Hardenscapes. Yes, like
I wasn't that sure that, but like the card turns out to be quite
like,
good.
When I read the card, it's much more of a +1/+1 counters card to me than its activated ability card. In a way that, like, I would try to put it in a deck that not naturally has a lot of +1/+1 counters on their stuff. And the first deck I think about when I think about +1/+1 counters is Hardened Scales. And turning all your, like, turning Hangarbag Walker into like Walking Ballista or into Arcbound Ravager is just, ugh.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It is pretty good.
Okay, so these are two new cards that made the biggest impact on the card format. There, of course, some like other minor changes, like the not that after all, like in Scam,
yeah, the new Fein Death.
Yeah, etc. But these two cards are quite impactful. Okay, let's go to to the
tier list.
metagame. Yeah.
Okay, so as always, A, B, C tiers. We don't have any S tier deck. Scam barely missed out on S tier. I think it was in S tier before I consolidated Rhinos as one archetype rather than two different. And then the like standard deviation stuff kind of changed. But it's very comfortably the most popular or the highest A tier deck. So,
Jędrek, give me a second. Can you talk briefly from how many weeks and how many like different moderns we are talking about? Because like the changes in the last modern art are quite fast.
That's a very good point. I started this from the first weekend that preordain was legal. So 5 weeks. We usually do 6 weeks, but I decided that including one non-preordain week and 5 preordain weeks is kind of weird. So I just cut it at 5 weeks because that just made more sense to me.
Okay, so it's like a month plus, right?
It's 5 weekends, and in this time we've had 20 challenges because now we have 4 challenges every weekend. We had one showcase qualifier or showcase challenge, the large one that everybody can play, and we had one super qualifier this past Sunday. So 22 events in total. I also thought about including prelims in those for quite a while because prelims are also like high quality events. And maybe we'll do it for the next time. It would require a lot of work in terms of making editing the spreadsheet that I'm using. And I thought about it like yesterday, 2 a.m. in the night today, or like today in the morning, and I just didn't have time to do this. But we might do this for next week, for next edition. Doesn't matter. Okay, so without any further ado, our A tier is, as I already mentioned, Scam at the very top. And then we have 4 color, Amulet, Rhinos, Yawgmoth, and Murktide. That's our A tier.
Okay, a lot has changed, right?
Yes, nothing like not much of that surprises me that much. If I was to say, if you asked me yesterday, top 5 decks in Modern, I would say Scam number 1, and then we have Murktide, Rhinos, Yawgmoth, and Tron. That would be my top 5 in some order. Scam is number 1, and then the other 4 decks. Murktide was the second most popular deck, so I would just have Murktide as my second or third probably, and then the other 3 that I just mentioned in some order. And it's somewhat close to this. 4 color at the second position is very surprising to me. Like, it makes sense. I think Beanstalk is a very good card. And yeah, it's a very good card for this. Once again, we'll talk about 4 color a bit.
Okay, let's start about
in a moment. Yeah,
Scam hasn't changed that much since the Pro Tour.
Yeah,
like
since Lord.
After, like once Pro Tour players decided, maybe not decided, but it turned out that Fable of the Mirror Breaker is better than Seasoned Pyromancer, that the 6 Undying Effects is enough, and that you don't obviously Orcish Bowmaster is quite good, and I haven't seen any major changes. Like, the only change I saw that's quite interesting, I saw in a few lists cutting Ragavans to the sideboard, which is quite interesting in my opinion, because like previously Ragavan was the number 1 card in a lot of matchups in the format, and nowadays with Orcish Bowmasters around, it's not that simple anymore. In my opinion.
I think like it depends on your view of this being a recent change. I know that people at the PT did that over a month ago. I know that Seth Manfield played 0 main deck Ragavans, and I think he just played like some amount in the sideboard. I think Sokos played 3 Ragavans, and various amount of times he wanted to play Ragavans in the sideboard maybe as well. No, Olsen wanted to play a sideboard the Ragavans as well. So it's not like it's something that started to happening last weekend. It's something that has been happening for a while now.
Of course.
But yeah, I guess this is our first time actually talking about Scam post Lord of the Rings, really. So yeah, it's just a deck that took almost exactly same place as Murktide had for the past few months, few years even. It's basically, if you look at the win percentage and the presence in the meta game, I just pulled it up for Sodek and I a second ago to check it. It's the most popular deck with ideally median win rate. It's in the 50th percentile of win rate, and it's the most popular deck. It's what Murktide was almost every 6 weeks to a fold for the last year or whatever. Like hovering around median win rate while being the most popular deck. It's just what it is. And yeah, it is a bit better than Murktide was. Murktide was usually like maybe 5% lower win rate on average, something like that. And it was shown in the PT. Like it was the most popular deck with like 54, I think, percent win rate, which is insane for being the most popular deck going into the tournament. Like everybody was like, okay, Scam is the most popular deck. We have to respect Scam. And it still was so well performing.
Yeah, but you know, like it all comes down to how good Orcish Bowmaster is. And after the card showed up, it's much harder to hate on Scam, because like previously people were trying to go over the top. We were trying to for example attack the graveyard to not let the Scam thing going, and now like the deck can play the fair game really well, and like it's a.
I think it always could have done it quite well.
Yeah, but it's even better now with Bowmaster.
Of course, it's a better deck than it was.
Yeah.
I think the biggest upside of Bowmasters is that you can cut a removal from your deck. Scam lists have very few actual removal spells these days. Like you see lists with like 3 lightning bolts, and that's all my 1 mana removal. Because
true.
Because you can just deal with those small creatures using Bowmasters. So it's not like you are cutting your linear cards for those Bowmasters. Of course, now you are playing like 6 Undying effects, and then in the past you were playing like maybe 7, maybe 8. So it's a small decrease in those, but mostly your deck is just creatures. And you're in very... Yeah, I think like the way that Scam plays now that is the most popular deck at every tournament, so you get to watch it a lot and play against it a lot and think about it a lot. It's just a very similar deck to Red, Black, and Pioneer. It's like this mid-range deck with a aggressive slant that has a lot of I'll just kill you draws. Like I play Disruption, and even if it's not a like Grief with Undying effect on turn 1, it's still like I'll play Thoughtseize, then I will play my 2-drop, I will play my 3-drop, and I will like bold you or something, and you are dead by turn 4 or whatever. So yeah, just a very well-rounded deck. Not much to talk about other than, I guess, the fact that Scam is the most popular deck and Murktide is the second most popular deck meant that some time ago, Scam kind of forgone some of those cheesy aspects like the main deck Blood Moons, stuff like that. Because like back in the day when Scam was like less popular of a deck, it was very standard to play like 2 or 3 Blood Moons in the main deck. And now basically nobody does that. Because
like sometimes you see 1 copy.
Yeah, you see like 1 copy from time to time, but it's not that common to see any copies main deck. And it used to be everybody had multiple main deck Blood Moons. And these days you just, okay, most 2 popular decks are not very cold to Blood Moon. In fact, both of them play Blood Moon themselves. So
what's the reason to play it, right?
What was the reason to play
that,
Blood Moon?
Like since we have the data from the last 5 weeks, and Up the Beanstalk is around not 5 weeks, but like
2 weeks,
probably
2 weekends.
weeks. Yeah, I feel that like that's the question with Up the Beanstalk. Do you feel like before Up the Beanstalk, 4-color versus Scam was relatively close? It was 50-50. Like, of course, 4-color in the long run should win, but it was somewhat challenging to survive to this moment. And Orcish Bowmasters was if you combine it with other pressure, it was quite good versus the One Ring. I'm curious how it will look like with Up the Beanstalk around, because I feel that it made Evoke Elementals better. That means that it will be harder to scam to tempo them out. Like my first thought would look like this.
You are still, I think you are still hung up on Evoke or Up the Beanstalk powering Evoke Elementals rather than Up the Beanstalk just gluing any draw you have together. It's just iteration. For the same reason that iteration is the best card against Murktide and against Red Black, when you are playing like Murktide Mirrors or against Red Black, is that you can't go under Up the Beanstalk. Like, it's so common for any like Ragavan mid-range deck, be it Scam, be it Murktide, to like, okay, I will counterspell your first 4-drop, or I will grieve your cheap spells and will put you behind because of that, because all your card advantage and all your important cards cost like 4 mana or whatever, and I will just try to go under you, and you will die with cards in your hand because you just didn't cobble together your draws. And with Up the Beanstalk, it's much less probable, especially when you are on the play as 4-color. There is very little counterplay to Up the Beanstalk from Ragavan decks, because it's like, and now we are transitioning to 4-color, I guess, which is the second deck on our list, because it's like, what will you do? Will you not play your turn 1 creature and keep up Spell Pierce? Like, against Ren, I think that makes sense to not play your Ragavan, but sometimes you just have to do it. Or you're playing Scam, and if you don't have turn 1 Grief or turn 1 Thoughtseize, which arguably I think you should mulligan a lot of those hands. And I think this is another point in the Scam box, that people realize they have to mulligan aggressively with this deck, and if you don't have turn 1 play, you should mulligan your 7 and maybe your 6 as well. Most of the time, unless you know the matchup and you have like 2 removal spells against a creature deck or whatever. But yeah, I think 4-color gained a lot, and I think it gained a lot also because of cards that people were cutting for Up the Beanstalk. As I said already, some lists just had no. I think Respect the Cat had 0 halflings. Yeah, his list was like, he had 3 1-drops, and it was 1 bold, 1 ephemerate, 1 prismatic ending. It was very weird to me. I get that you want to have this variety of cheap cards to play with Ren's emblem, but yeah, I think that what you said earlier about McWinsauce's Bring to Light angle, I think makes a lot of sense in terms of, if you cast your 5-drop and it gets countered, but you draw a card on top of that, it's much less devastating than if it just gets countered. So I guess for the same reason, I think Teferi is a bit better, Teferi Hero, because you draw from Up the Beanstalk, then you draw from its plus, so even if they Unholy Heated, you still draw 2 cards from your 5-drop, so trade it 3 for 1 effectively. I do like the idea of, as I said earlier, like, you're playing a base band deck, and then you may have Bring to Light, so you can play like an Omnath, you can play Valky, but you don't have to stretch your mana so far as to incorporate Ren and 6, which I think is in general a pretty large gain, because like going 4-color on your mana deals a lot of damage to you, and if you don't get your Omnath going, it's very easy for Scam or Murktide to just chip damage you out of the game.
Yeah, that's the plan after all, right?
Yeah, but that's why, like, if you are playing 4-color over more like 3-color focused blue-white X deck, you will get like what, maybe 2, maybe 3 damage less from your lands on average. It all adds up, especially with Ring in your deck. I think when I played the like blue-white with Omnath deck a while ago, I liked the fact that you can fetch so many basics and like have your life total not being under such pressure, and you play very well against Blood Moon as well, compared to like normal 4-color. I think there's a good amount of value to focusing on 3 colors instead of 4, but
Yeah,
it remains to be seen.
All you need to do is to just test it and win the next challenge.
I'm not gonna play this deck because Mertide is better, but yeah, whatever.
Of course. Okay, the next deck from the list. It's kind of surprising to me. It's Amulet.
It is Amulet, and it's mostly Gurik winning every challenge ever existing. Yeah, Amulet is at the also like a median win rate and a fairly big presence for Amulet. Amulet was like what, the 4th most popular deck in that 5 weeks period. I guess a lot of it might be because Dom Harvey top-8 the PT, and people like playing, like people who like Amulet really like Amulet, so they just wanted to play. But also had like decent results, as I said, Gurik putting up like at least 1 win and like 1 other final appearance and probably 2 more top-8s in the last 5 weeks or something. So kind of single-handedly carrying Amulet players. If you go to Gurik posted 8 results in this span of time. Some of those could be like 5-2s and top 16s, but still 8 results in those like 20-something events is very impressive.
It's
very impressive.
Okay,
yeah,
do you think that Amulet gained the most from all the decks that are playing One Ring?
Yes,
Because
I was just about to say it.
Yeah.
It's just the best one. It's the best deck at utilizing One Ring. It
Why?
can play One Ring on turn 2
Nice.
somewhat easily, and you are just not losing those games. You are not losing games when you play One Ring on turn 2, because this is also a deck that converts One Ring cards into kills. Probably the easiest of all decks. Maybe Tron can do it easier, but it's a very similar like level of if you let your opponent draw like even 3 extra cards with Ring, the game's over so often. And they can play it on turn 2, which also means that you kind of need cards in your deck that previously were not very good against Amulet.
Yeah. That's a problem. Like for instance, when I was playing Living End, Force of Negation was the first card to cut.
That's a big one, yeah. Force of Negation used to be very medium at best against Amulet.
You have to keep it, and that's super,
exactly
super poor.
Also, like if your plan was to, okay, now I will play Alpine Moon or Blood Moon or Force of Vigor or Dress Down or any of those cards that previously were like best sideboard cards against Amulet, none of them does anything to against One Ring.
Yeah, and they just bury with card advantage. In my opinion, like obviously sideboards are like a bit different from each other. In my opinion, Amulet, like there was for a lot of time, people were saying that Amulet is quite bad, and every like new card that's added to the deck forced other players to try it out again. Then the Amulet was popular for 1 week or 2, and then it disappears. But for a long in the last few years, we saw 2 major changes. The first one was Cultivator Colossus that turned out to be quite good and stayed in the deck, and the second one is One Ring. And like the deck is not going anywhere. Like It's that I feel it's what's needed in this format. It's a somewhat consistent turn-free combo deck that, on the other hand, can be stopped with creature removal if someone wants to. But like you won't win against this deck with only creature removal, unless you have like 15 copies of it. So overall, that was surprising to me. I was thinking that Amulet will be between tier A and tier 1 and tier 2, and it just overperformed, my opinion.
Yes, I was surprised to see Amulet as well, that highly. Okay, next up we have Rhinos, which I think mostly can thank for its position in the metagame to the fact that I think it has the most like solid matchup against Scam out of all those decks. Maybe it's not the best matchup. So some people will say, like, I think it's very a knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, Scam is bad against 4-color because of all those like big cards and stuff. And of course, those games can happen when you like outvalue them. But Rhinos, I think just Rhino's main plan just lines up so well against Scam because it's a very resilient deck to discard, especially the 4-color version. And although like we grouped both of them together, which I think makes sense, the same way we didn't really used to like divide blue-white hammer and mono-white hammer. Like it's the same deck after all. Like also 4-color versions of Rhinos are like two different thingies. Some people don't play lane binding and they just have like I just have one Temple Guard in my deck to have more cascades. There was a good amount of lists I've seen with no bindings, no real domain. I just have Ardent Plea in my deck because I want to have more cascade against Scam, which makes sense.
Lane binding is a tricky card in some matchups because there are decks that can get rid of lane binding very easily with, for example, Boseju. So when I was playing Rhinos in the last weeks, I tend to side out lane binding.
I think it's basically. I think it's basically if you expect a lot of Murktides, you want binding because binding is your best card against Murktide Regent, and if you don't, then you play 3 colors or you play 4-color with no binding. If you even like in general, just a plan of making 2 4/4s for 3 mana and top decking to them very well is just an effective way of winning the games versus like Scam, versus Yawgmoth, versus Murktide to some extent if you can take care of their Murktides.
I also want to point out that like we didn't have haven't talked about Lorien Revealed in the Rhinos, and the fact that the deck now has more blue cards to support blue pitch spells better is a big game. Because like Force of Negation was always around then, and Subtlety was a tool in some metagames, but after Lorien Revealed was printed, it's basically in every Rhinos deck list.
I think it's the least important part of Lorien Revealed in this deck, pitching 2 cards. I think the most important part of Lorien Revealed is that this deck couldn't play cantrip because of Cascade and couldn't afford to ever miss their first free land drops because you need to have 3 lands on turn 3, otherwise you are so far behind. So you wanted to play like 26 lands. Like I know that, for example, Dom Harvey was really high on just playing 25 or 26 lands in Rhinos because you can't miss your land drops in this deck. You just can't, or you will be super far behind. So Lorien Revealed allows you to have those virtual 26 lands while also being a way to refuel later in the game, which was a major problem for Rhinos playing like mid-range matchups before. Like you answer the Rhinos and they are very, very quickly they become just this top decking mid-range impaired deck with like okay, I have few of those cascade spells, but you just run out of gas very quickly in this deck, especially if you like say pitch card early on, and now you have just
kinda yes, but also, in my opinion, so many decks struggle to win versus turn 3 into turn 4 cascade that it's not the biggest problem, especially when Lorien Revealed is not exactly what I want to do versus 4 color, for example, because
of course not.
My goal is to end the game quickly.
But that's what you want to do against Scam and against Murktide.
Yeah, against Scam, sure. Against
two
Murktide,
most popular decks.
Against Murktide, I would be super scared of it being spell pierced, because
you just trade 1 for 1, and then they don't have spell pierced for your cascade.
For 1 mana, that's
but you play 1 card per turn because your deck has only expensive spells. Like it doesn't matter all that much that you trade 5 mana for 1 mana in those cases, because you just single spell every turn anyways. So I think it's a kind of a bad argument. Also, like spell pierce will just counter your things anyways, very often.
Like somewhat often, it's easier to counter a 5-drop than a 3-drop, right?
Being a split card of land and action in this deck is, I think, it's the best. It's the most like it's the deck that utilizes Lorien Reveal the best in all Modern. It's just this very like baseline use of Lorien Revealed as split card of land and action is at its best in this deck. Very similarly to why land cyclers are like so good in Living End, because it's like the split card of, or like rather a dual role of being a land and an action at the same time in Living End. So yeah, just a very good deck. And we are basically in a mid-range world right now in Modern. Like Scam is mid-range, Rhinos is mid-range, Murktide is mid-range. Murktide with Preordain is a bit more like tempo-ish, I think. It's got a... With Preordain and with Ring, we'll get to Murktide in a second, but so I guess all those mid-range is why decks like Coffers kinda succeeded, but we'll talk about Coffers later on as well. Then we have Yawgmoth, which was a deck that was very hyped in the first like 2 or 3 weeks of LOTR Modern. We had Zerg winning a challenge with like One Ring Yawgmoth, and then a bunch of people playing, and then top 8ing Bologna, alongside another Yawgmoth player, I think, in that top 8. And then we had a fairly decent showing from some Yawgmoth players at the PT. I know that Dom Harvey won his win-in against Yawgmoth.
Overall, Yawgmoth had poor showing based on percentages, but like some players were able to pull off. Overall, when I took Zerg, Yawgmoth wasn't the best choice.
He wasn't very high on that after the PT.
Yeah, but that sometimes happens. Overall, that's another Orcish Bowmasters deck that got some other new additions. Like from Lord of the Rings, we got Elven Horus, right?
Elven Horus, yes.
Yeah, and obviously the new 2-mana Cauldron.
And One Ring.
One Ring is not played anymore. Like it was
Zerg plays One Ring. Zerg plays like almost every Yawgmoth list has either 2 Elven Chorus or 2 One Rings in the sideboard. And it seems like Zerg is the only one playing One Ring instead of Chorus, but he was very adamant about it.
It was like, I'm checking the super qualifier list by Zerg, and he doesn't have either One Ring or Horus.
Well, that's what he said on Saturday, and the qualifier was on Sunday, so...
Yeah,
maybe those 24 hours changed his opinion on it. Maybe he said it to me Friday or something, because I talked about him this weekend about this weekend, and he said, yeah, I'm still playing One Rings, and then 24 hours later he's not playing One Rings anymore.
Cauldron is the new technology. I really like the fact that Cauldron sideboarding a bit different. For instance, I see in Zerx this Spike Feeder as a way to gain life. Maybe there's a combo there, I don't know, but maybe it's just a card versus burn. Like if you can trade any of your creature into gain to life.
Of course it's a combo. Like Spike Feeder in the graveyard, Yawgmoth to Undying creature just goes infinite. Or like draws your deck. Of course it does.
Okay, if it works, like I haven't seen in action for a second. I also saw Fulminator Mage as a way to combat with mana.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
That's super cute. So overall,
with Young Wolf,
yeah, it's too easy. With like tokens from Bowmasters, etc. Like.
Oh, speaking of Bowmasters, I think this is the best deck at utilizing Bowmasters as well. Like all the part of Bowmasters is very well utilized in this deck. There is not a deck that uses the 1/1 token from Bowmasters better than Yawgmoth. To sacrifice to Yawgmoth, to sacrifice to Grease, to convoke Chord of Calling, or even to deliver random beats. It's just a perfect card for this deck. If it only was green. If it was green, it would be.
We can't have everything. Okay, Murktide?
Murktide.
Okay, we have 3 minutes. Let's go.
I will have as much minutes as I want to. So many people were down on Murktide after Lord of the Rings and the PT. Some high-profile players played Murktide the PT, Stefan Schutz and Alan Wu, I believe, to a very unexciting finish. I think Alan didn't make day 2, and I think Stefan was 5-5 in Modern. But they foreshadowed pre-order unban by playing 2 copies of Serum Visions in their deck at the PT. So I did get something there. I think pre-order just made this deck back from being like a tier 2-ish deck post Lord of the Rings into being an excellent deck. And those improvements are somewhat intangible sometimes. Because like, how much better the cantrip will make your deck? The answer is much better. Preordain being a sorcery makes Delirium much easier to achieve. Preordain being a 1-mana sorcery makes Channeler so much better, especially in context of Orcish Bowmasters, because the problem with X1s is that they suck into Bowmasters. But now, with Preordain, your deck has such a good spread of types on such low mana cost that if you're on the play, you can very often play turn 1 Channeler, and by the time they have 2 mana to Bowmaster it, you will have Delirium. Or like it's a very common pattern of you play turn 1 Channeler, on turn 2 you Preordain, and if you used Fetch and Preordain, that's 2 cards. 2 card types already. You need either artifact or creature to be put into your graveyard from X-Cries. And then if they play Bowmasters, you just bolt Bowmasters with trigger on the stack and you have Delirium. It's very, very common to do that. And Channeler as a free flyer is a very important card against Scam, I think. Channeler in general is a very important card against Scam. Because it digs you towards 2 cards that matter in this matchup, which is Iteration and Murktide. This deck just got so much leaner than it was before. Nobody plays expensive cards like Archmage's Charm anymore. Nobody plays like... Some people play Ledger Shredder. I don't think it's a good idea. I think one of the biggest problems with Murktide always was drawing too much of one group of cards that's not cantrip. Like, if you have too many threats in your deck, you will just flood on threats, and you don't have ways to enable your threats if you don't have cantrips, because every threat in your deck other than Ragavan is bad if you don't have cantrips. So, in multiples at least. So I don't think you want to play more than the core 12 threats, 8 1-drops and 4 Murktides. I think adding Shredders before you have 4 Merctides in your deck is especially egregious, because it's like, to me it's showing that like you do not really understand how important and how vital Merctide is to your wins in most popular matchups, which is once again Scam, and Merctide in total is like between 1/3 and 1/4 of the metagame. So you just need to be good in those matchups. And when I was calculating like the average CMC of this deck now for like some land math and stuff, it was like 1.2. Your average CMC of spells is 1.2. If you count Merctide as 2 mana spell, because it's obviously a 2 mana spell, and if you count Subtlety as a 2 mana spell as well, because on average it's like either 0 or 4, so 2 mana I think is fair to me. So this deck is very lean, very resilient, and I think it needed that because you can't really outgrind One Ring decks the same way you could have outgrind slower decks before. Because when you were playing against Blue-White before Ring and they play like Jace or Teferi or whatever, okay, they draw an extra card, you hit it and it's fine. You just move along with your life and you win somehow. You can't do the same thing to Ring. So you really need to be more proactive and to set up those, like, your ideal turn 4 is you play Merctide, hold up counterspell for their big card, you counter their big card, and you untap and you just create so much advantage because of that, that you win this way. So I think it was a really needed printing. And yeah, don't play Shredder.
Printing, right?
Oh, unban. Really needed addition. Don't play Shredder in your deck. I think it's a big one. Play for Merctides, play Iterations, play, I don't know, Channelers, Ragavans. Play good cards.
Do you think that Spellsnare will be better moving forward?
I'm playing 2 Spellsnares in my 75, and I think it's also very important because it, once again, it's like this deck is so often like acts like a somewhat of a combo deck in so many matchups, in the way of you assemble A plus B, which is Merctide plus protection spell for Merctide, and Spellsnare deals with Terminate, for example. So it's very common you play Merctide with Spellsnare backup against Scam, and you just win the game off of it. Or you play Merctide with Spellsnare in the mirror and you counter their counterspell. Also Spellsnare like counters Bowmasters, which is very good against your 1-drops. So once again, it's a very good card in 2 most popular matchups. So even though it's like not very good against Rhinos, even though it has its applications in that matchup, I think it's important to play it. And yeah, play Jace. Not playing Jace is a skill issue, or like rather not understanding why Jace is a good card in this deck.
I would say why Jace is not as bad as people think. I don't feel it's like if Jace will remain banned, the deck wouldn't change that much. Like it's not like having this one Jace won't change your. It
changes a lot with your 20 cantrips deck or whatever. Like you just see your one so often with this deck, and like Jace is never the best card in any scenario, because like, oh, maybe if you want to bounce Merctide, just play more Borrowers. But well, sometimes you don't need to bounce Merctide. Sometimes you need to win the game or draw more cards, and Borrower won't do that. And if you need to bounce Merctide, well, One Ring draws more cards than Jace, but it's also like playing one copy of One Ring in the sideboard is not a great idea, I think, in a deck like that, especially against Scam, when you are in this like tight damage rate situation very often. But also One Ring won't bounce Merctide, which is important, or won't win through like a Snaring Bridge or Infi Life or whatever. It's just a card that does many things just good enough that having one in your sideboard will net you a lot of win rate in comparison to like playing, once again, another Borrower or any other like mid-rangey card you can imagine. And sometimes there will be metagames where Jace is not good and you can just not play it there. And it makes perfect sense. No, there are no sacred cows, I think, in Magic in general. But I think there's a huge difference between not playing Jace because it's not good in a current metagame and not understanding why the card is good. Because the first one is a conscious choice that, well, I, the biggest Jace lover in the world, am not always playing Jace because sometimes it's not good in my opinion.
What?
But not understanding why it's so good when it is good in this deck, I think is a major skill issue. And I will fight anyone who wants to fight me on this axis forever.
Okay.
All right, B tier.
I forgot to check the clock, but it was above 3 minutes for sure. But
it was not even 3 minutes about Jace, which I think I gave myself 3 minutes to talk about Jace, and I think it was 2.5 minutes about Jace. All right.
Yeah, and overall, it was an interesting talk. One of the very few really interesting talks about Merktech that I really listened all of them. So well done, Jendrik.
Thank you.
Okay, B tier.
Okay, B tier. We have Living End, Tron, Burn, Mill, Jan Saga, Coffers, and Creativity at the very tail end of the B tier, which is a major fall from being on the top of the format. And then we'll talk about Hammer in a second, because as you noticed, it's not in the B tier even. Yeah.
You know, like when you read this list, what it's super obvious for me now. Like if you when you read the tier 1A, it's all about the interaction, mid-range, etc. When you read tier B, it's all about being linear.
Yes.
Yeah. Like it's just.
Well, I guess with an outlier of Jan Saga, but yeah.
Yeah, but like it's a battle between the good cards and good shells and solution decks, and we clearly see that solution decks are a bit of a dog.
I don't think that Living End is a solution deck.
Okay, the Living End is the only one.
I don't think that Tron
is
a solution deck anymore as well.
What?
I think Ben and Mill are, of course, big solution decks.
Coffers are solution
Coffers
decks?
is also a major solution deck that we'll talk about later. But now, before we move on to the whole B tier, well, I guess you saw the spreadsheet, but would you care to venture a guess about what was the most winningest deck in this 5-week span?
Sadly, I saw it earlier, but it's super surprising that it's
Mill.
Yes.
It is Mill.
When you think about it, it's not that strange because no one has any card to beat Mill. It's super easy to beat Mill. You just put one Emrakul to your sideboard and then you win, or like another Eldrazi. But no one did that.
Yeah, because also Mill has the second lowest presence of all of those decks, so it makes sense.
So
It's very often that decks with lowest presence has the highest win rate or one of the highest win rates, just because of how it like lines up. Because on average you'll just like if you have only one result and that result like that's the extreme, because we don't have any decks with only one result in those pool because we cap them on 1.5% presence, but at the very extreme, if you have deck with 1% with one showing and it goes XO in the tournament, it's just 100% win rate, which is impossible if you have. It's literally impossible if you have two of the same deck in one top 8. It can't have 100% win rate. So, yeah. Okay, start with Living End. So
we'll talk about Mill later. Living End. The biggest change and the only one change in the Living End was the addition of Land Cyclers from Lord of the Rings. There's a discussion about Oliphant versus Generous End. I'm a caveman saying that having 8 power is more important than all the small things. Overall, I feel that like at first people were playing 8 Land Cyclers and 15 lands. It was kind of too much. Now players are more into playing 6 Land Cyclers and 15 lands. Sometimes 16, but it's not that like it's somewhat rare to see. So and the rest of the deck hasn't changed. Like there's also a discussion if Waker of Wakes should be a 4-off or should you cut something else, for example, Stripe or Rivenwinder. So like what cycler do you cut? Like Waker of Wakes is more impactful because it's a bigger body and can DQ1 card deeper, but it's sometimes a number with land cyclers, because you on turn 2 you can't get a land and draw a card, or if you use Waker to find your land drop, and if you find the land cycler, that means that you won't be able to cascade on turn 3. And if you cycle looking for a land for just 1 mana, you have 6 more hits to find the third land because of the land cycler. So that's probably the only change. Overall, Living End had an extremely good showing right after Lord of the Rings was printed, like similarly to Modern Horizons when Modern Horizons 2 was printed, and Cascade decks were just phenomenal. Now everyone are prepared. They have either Chalice of the Void or some form of counter magic, and it's easy to see random Chalice of the Void. For instance, Burn plays Chalice of the Void because they can, even if the matchup Burn versus Living End is somewhat okay for Burn. It's maybe not okay. It's very winnable even without Chalice of the Void around. So that's, in my opinion, that shows how people respect Living End and Rhinos, of course. Although Rhinos have more answers to the hate, so personally I see it being hate for Living End. And like being in high tier B is perfectly fine in my opinion. Okay, next deck.
Yep, not much to add about Living End. It's still the extremely powerful linear strategy that's also gets hosted by a wide variety of things. So it being a very sinusoidal deck makes a lot of sense. And the same way that Dredge does in formats where Dredge is good, like Vintage, or I guess it's just Vintage these days. Okay, then we have Tron, which is, as always, around Modern PT, Tron gets a lot of popularity because it's, for some reason, always a deck with very good performance at the PT. And maybe it's because it's much harder to play than people think it is.
Maybe.
And my personal favorite is Jant players who think Tron is brainless, where clearly Jant is a deck that's much easier to play, in my opinion. But yeah, Tron got a lot from One Ring, and I think it has a lot of course, direct buffs because of Ring, but it also have indirect buffs in terms of Blood Moon is not a good card against Tron anymore, which is something that a lot of people has a problem with wrapping their head around. Of course, if you play turn 2 Blood Moon from Ragavan sometimes, or if you play Blood Moon from like a Belcher deck or whatever, it's okay. But in general, if you tap 3 mana to play Blood Moon and then they untap, play their 4th land, play Ring, you lose. If they untap, they play 4th land, they play Karn, you lose. If they untap, play O-Stone, you are often behind as well. If they untap, cast one of their many tutor for lands and they find Boseiju, you lose. It's just such an easy card to answer these days, and like the opportunity cost of tapping 3 mana and like the tempo loss you are like enforcing on yourself is just so punishing. And it's like, it of course applies to decks like Scam and Murktide mostly. You just want to pressure them and disrupt them, like Scam wants to turn 1 Grief or turn 1 Fury, of course. Murktide wants to like play their 1-drops and then hold up counter spells. If you really want to hate out Tron with decks like this, I think Obsidian Charmo is a pretty good card against Tron, but it's also extremely narrow because you will rarely, if ever, board it against other decks than Tron. Think the best land hate cards right now, if you need it, is Alpine Moon, because it's just very efficient. It's very cheap.
1 mana.
Yes, if you play it on turn 3 and they Boseiju it, it's not a big deal because you still have mana left. You can do other things. You can hold up counter spells. So I think if you want to play a land hate card, I think Alpine Moon is much better. And yeah,
I also want to say how impactful was the switched philosophy of Tron from the team handshake. Like that changed the deck by a lot. Like previously, no one even thought about playing not playing less than 4 Sylvan Scryings, for example. No one thought about playing Urza's Saga in the deck.
That's not true. A lot of people played as a saga at the first few months of Tron, or of the first few months of Modern Horizons too.
You haven't seen Talisman of the Resilience.
Yeah, but it's
Current Liberated was more important than it is now, etc. I feel that there's like the jump from being all about Tron to being a solid, maybe not mid-range deck, but a solid deck without Tron, and
it's exactly what I said. It's Tron is a 4-drop deck, not a 7-drop deck anymore, and that's just a major shift in how it's played. And yep, it's a very scary deck. And I don't think there's a deck I respect more than Tron when I play Magic in general. Tron is just very scary to me. A skilled Tron player it's not somebody I want to face in my tournaments that often.
Do you think that Tron will be a natural balance to the rise of 4-color thanks to the up to Beanstalk?
Might be, but Tron was also a good deck into Murktide. Like Tron's favored against Murktide, and I think that Tron is much closer against Scam than people think it is.
It's like 45%, something like this, right?
I think it might be even better for Tron than that. I think that like if Scam players actually think about their matchups and adapt, it might be tougher. Like if those Blood Moons turn to Fulminator Mages, for example, you just play Fulminator Mage, and if you don't have to blow a land on turn 3, you use it on turn 4 with a Scam trick, and then you just blow two lands. And if you have any subsequent Scam trick, you draw turns into Stone Rain for 1 mana. So yeah, like
that sounds cool.
I think that Tron is just a strong deck, and I thought it would be higher. I think it's inherently a very strong deck in the way it's built right now. And also this member was a very clever addition, I think. Combating Scam cards, combating like 1-drops from Murktide, stuff like that. A very good addition to the deck.
Killing Ragavan too. So.
Yeah, 1-drops in general. Yeah. Okay. Burn?
Burn.
Not much to say about Burn.
Was my go-to deck in a couple months. And it's like it had its moment right after the Lord of the Rings was released. It was considered one of the best decks in the format then. Maybe not the best, like no one was really prepared, etc. And the metagame shifts made Burn much better because Hammer is no longer super high, and it was super tough for Burn to beat them. The Murktide matchup without Ledger Shredder is a bit better, and Burn just destroys Scam. Like it's maybe I don't say it's hard to lose, but it's like if you want to beat Scam with something, just play Burn. That's in my opinion the best deck to demolish Scam.
I think it's a very similar principle to why Rhinos are solid against Scam. You just do the same thing over and over again, and there is not much Scam can interact against you. Like not many interaction points.
If you compare Scam to, for example, Jant or anything else, like Lightning Bolt can kill basically every threat. Outside Fury with the counter, you can kill every.
Yeah, there's no Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, so for instance, even if they go Terran Grief, you can just top deck Searing Blaze, top deck Lightning Bolt, kill it. You go free for free, and it's not the end of the world. So Burn remains quite good. In my opinion, its positioning is a bit worse because 4-color control with Up the Beanstalk can be quite tough. I still think it will be a solid like somewhat around 50% at least, but it won't be that easy like previously when Burn players were like preying on 4-color to get played against, and I don't feel it will be a thing anymore. Also, the matchup versus Amulet is just super poor, so there are some problems for Burn, but after all these years, the deck is still positioned quite well. Rolling Vortex is a cool card. Don't play Eidolon of the Great Revel unless you... I don't know even if there are
Just
any
don't
good
play
reasons to play it. Just
don't play it.
And play for Sanctifiers in the sideboard because they are quite good. Okay, Mill.
Okay. I just checked. We had 6 Mill results, and only 2 were Tybalt. So it's still like third of Mill results are Tybalt.
Tybalt of the Red Sub, the most dedicated Mill player in the planet, probably.
All Japanese players called Mill, I think, LD for Library Destruction.
Library Destruction.
Or Library Out. I think it's LD or LO. When you had the mocks like Excel for players in the one that Tybalt attended, I think it was the last one. It was his playstyle was he just put LO is live or something like that. So he just he doesn't play anything else. He just plays Mill.
Like imagine like if you play Mill all the time and you are playing an 8-person tournament and you still register Mill.
Yeah, you're just bound to do poorly. You just can't do well with Mill in that environment. It's just impossible, I think.
Mill's biggest power is that its metagame share is quite low. And
yes.
No one ever thinks about adding Emrakuls to their set.
Yeah, that's why exploit decks are exploit decks. If they become popular, they instantly become bad because everybody has.
Short coming back to the Burn, I saw 4-color list with 3 Blossoming Calms. That's for me. That's a signal that you should think twice about playing Burn in the next week or two.
That makes sense.
But playing Mill now, oh boy, that looks so good. With 4-color being on the rise, I really like the idea, and I'm very sad that
I don't know how good Mill is into 4-color with like a lot of endurances.
Like if they don't have a lot of endurance, if they don't play Manic Endurance anymore, they play like 2 post sideboard.
Also, Tasha's is not very good against them, right?
Yeah,
because they have a lot of expensive spells, and if they go to 75 cards, then it's much worse for you.
Still, even when 4-color decks were Yorion piles, it was a good matchup for Mill, mostly because they couldn't kill you fast enough.
That makes sense, and you can just you will often mill their important lands, and they can't fetch their mana properly.
Yeah, and attack their mana with Triumph.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
that makes sense. Okay,
like that's in my opinion. Also, it has maybe a super good but a positive matchup versus Amulet, which is quite good.
On the rise, definitely on the rise.
Mill important things. So if you want to play Mill, go for it now. That's the moment this week, exact. Maybe the next one too. And one thing about Mill, I'm super sad that random Mill cards are so expensive because I would like to play Mill in my LGS, but spending so many bucks on random cards that will let me Mill once every 3 months is...
I think if you just buckle up and drink water from a filter rather than thousands of liters of Coke every day, you'll just be able to buy those cards for those bucks very, very quickly.
It's not like I can afford them.
I know you can. I know you can.
It's about maybe I should buy One Drinks instead.
Just do it. Do it. Just buy milk cards.
I will just have mana.
Speaking of expensive cards that don't do much, Jan Saga.
Like for a brief moment, Jan Saga was a solution deck.
Somewhat solution, yes.
To the rise of Scam, because Jan Saga, I don't want to say destroys Scam, but has all the tools you need. It has
no deck destroys Scam. There are no decks that destroy Scam, and that's why Scam is the best deck.
Yeah, but like it's like
Tarmogoyf is
had
good
all
against
the tools.
Scam, and Tarmogoyf is good
Saga is
against
good.
Murktide. So, like in general, if you are playing mid-range matchups, mid-range mirrors, I think Jan Saga is a good deck for those matchups, and I think it also benefits from the dip in popularity of Hammer because there are way less dress downs than there used to be, and dress down is a very important card against Saga, both against tokens and Tarmogoyfs. But also Saga has the most famous number of Ren and 6 and Saga. And I just don't think you need to, like, on average, Jan Saga seems to me like a deck you are playing if you want to be clever and out-level Scam. But in so many aspects, Saga is just worse Scam. Like against so many decks, you'd rather have more consistent and disruptive kills than this extra color and this backup plan of making tokens that trumps other mid-range decks.
Making bad tokens, because it's not like Jan Saga will create you an 8/8. It's a 2/2, maybe 3/3.
No, it's like a 3/3 by default, right? It's you make one token, you make the second token, and then you find an artifact. That's 3/3 at least.
But you know, like if we compare it to tokens that were created from Hammer,
Of course, it's smaller.
They are much worse, right? But overall, Jan Saga is around. If your metagame is full of Scam, go for it. Otherwise,
Jan Saga is the same thing to Scam that Blue-Red Wizards are to Murktide. It's a very good way of winning mid-range mirrors. That's bad overall, because sometimes you are getting paired with your Flame of Honor no Ragavan deck against Tron, and then you lose horribly. It's just the very similar comparison to me. Okay. Speaking of horrible decks and horribly all those things, we have covers next, and
are you biased, Jędrek?
I'm not biased. I just think that covers can never be. Come again.
If you want to rate your hate to covers in 0 out of 10, how much do you don't like this deck?
It's not that I don't like it. I actually think it's kind of cool.
Okay.
I like monocolor decks in general. Seeing one color of mana in your mana base just fills my mathematician heart with so much joy at being able to consistently cast your spells. And I want to applaud the Iriel for cutting the 8th demolition field from his deck so he can cast his spells more often. That's a very good thing to do. But in general, like, Coffers is just an exploit deck that can never win against other One Ring decks consistently. Like, Coffers, when I played Blue-White, Coffers was a buy. Was like an actual buy. And if you build your One Ring deck with Demolition Field in mind, that's another big plus of playing like less colorful for color. If you have basics to cast your spell in your deck, you will never lose to Coffers because they are slow. They don't really have ways of stopping your top decks because they are a discard deck. If you play One Ring against them, it's over. If you play like I don't know, a Karn against them, it's also not great for them. Like their plan against like big mana decks is just to Field of Ruin them into Oblivion, but if you're on the draw, that's not really something you can do that often. I just think like, but that's not even the worst matchups. Like big mana is a bit too big, I think. Coffers can kind of go under it with like Field of Ruins and stuff. The worst matchups are One Ring Leyline Binding decks. You just can't beat them consistently, I think. It's just so hard because every big spell in your deck can be answered by them and you don't have the same thing. Like we are both slow decks and you have you don't have answers to their payoffs and they have very many answers to your payoffs. And you will never kill One Ring deck with Orcish Bowmasters if it's your only creature. Or like, okay, you have also Shieldred. But oh, look, here's Solitude. here's, I don't know,
Leyline Binding.
Leyline Binding, whatever. It's just this deck is an exploit deck. It's also...
I heard it's a Murktide killer. And
I don't think that's true.
And like we said, yeah, Murktide can never go below 40% against
It just can't. It just can't.
Yeah, but the numbers say otherwise. And
no, you are citing real numbers, which is basically the same situation but in reverse. Like it's one person's experience,
kinda
but from the other side.
Also,
Coffers is a very powerful standard deck. The way it's built, it's still a 26 lands mid-range deck that will just not draw what they need that many times. Because, like, okay, you can mulligan to your payoff cards, which is important, but there will be many Coffers draws when one Thoughtseize or one Spell Pierce will just stop their plan, and you just get a good amount of wins from this, that you are playing a very lean, sleek deck, and they are playing a 26 lands deck with no card selection. And of course, if Coffers Demonic Tutors every turn, they defeat Murktide that Demonic Tutors every turn, probably. Depends on how many solid subtleties and forces you have in your deck, but in general, if you Demonic Tutor with both decks, I know, that's even not true. I think Murktide wins that, but doesn't matter. Of course, if you can, because you have free spells and they don't have, and you win because of that. That doesn't happen because you can't Demonic Tutor in Magic, but in general, of course, there are draws that Coffers will just demolish Murktide, and if you are a dipshit Murktide player who can't play around Demolition Field and Field of Ruin, you will get destroyed all that much often. But in general, there are just no Murktide killers the same way there are no Scam killers, and that's why those legs are on the top. You can never be above 60% against Murktide. You can never be above 60% against Scam in a long run. It just doesn't happen. Talking about skill pilots, of course, and not randos who autopilot their decks.
Okay, overall, Coffers turn out to be...
It's a solid exploit deck. Definitely.
Solid deck
I think it's a solid exploit deck. And yeah, that's about it.
I have a lot of questions about how I haven't played Coffers and against Coffers that much, and I'm curious how the Coffers versus Amulet matchup looks like. Coffers versus Yavmod.
I think Coffers versus Amulet is terrible for Coffers on the draw, and on the play, I don't know if you can salvage it on the play. On the draw, it's gotta be terrible on the draw. Like, there is no way it's good for Coffers on the draw, because so more than half of the time they won't be even able to use their Demolition Field before they die. Yeah, it's gotta be terrible on the draw.
On the other hand, once you have all these Demolition Fields, you can just never let them do a thing.
I remember how Field of Ruin Blue-White was, how good Field of Ruin was in Blue-White versus Amulet, and it was okay. But Blue-White was also a much more structurally sound deck versus Amulet because we have counter magic. But yeah, okay. Creativity?
Yes.
Okay, so creativity, I don't think there's much to say about it other than pre-Lord of the Rings, it was one of the best decks in the format, and now it's skirting the lower end of B tier. It's just not very good against One Ring. It's not very good against Bowmasters, because in many of those mid-range mirrors, your plan was to just create a bunch of dwarves and pressure them this way, and now one Bowmasters deals with at least one dwarf, and usually with 2 or 3. So, yeah, I just think that creativity suffered a lot from those metagame changes, and Scam is also not a very good matchup, I think.
Whoa, wait a second. That's the opposite, in my opinion. One of the reasons why Scam wasn't that popular back then was the creativity being at the top, because again, it can play quite well from the top, right?
Yeah, but now we have Bowmasters, so I think it changes a lot in this matchup.
Yeah, that's true.
Because you don't have to... You just don't have to hold up Terminate all the time. You just hold up Bowmasters, and then you play it and you pressure, and then if they make Archon, oh, you sacrifice an army, but I still have my 4/4 double strike Fury that will trade with Archon, or I will terminate the Archon later on. You have more fodder to Archon, you have better plan against their dwarves.
Okay, we can all agree that the scam matchup became harder when Bowmasters got printed. The one thing I wanted to talk about is the addition of silence. I saw it already at the Pro Tour, and like I saw more and more lists playing like 3 or 4 copies of silence, just as a way to combat cascade, combat counter magic, and even combat like linear decks like Tron.
I think it's pretty smart.
Yeah, I like it too. If you want to just buy yourself some time, it's often correct to...
Yeah, it being like a split of protection spell and counter magic against cascade is just very strong.
Okay, C tier, let's go.
C tier. We have Hammer, Scales, Titan Shift, and Blue-Black Ring. So Hammer just fell off because of Lord of the Rings. It had like a bit of a upswing. Yeah, it had a bit of a upswing around PT. It did pretty well against the PT. It kind of did well after that, but it's just, if you look at the win rates, I think Hammer's win rate is not very good. Yeah, Hammer is like, 32nd percentile of win rate, which is not very good and also not that popular. It just struggles too much. And if 4-color becomes more popular, I can't imagine it being good for Hammer.
Yeah, Orcish Bowmasters and One Ring are both quite good versus Hammer.
Yes, exactly.
So by definition, it can be a good environment for
Yep.
the deck. And the next one is Scales, and I feel the history changes a bit with Scales. I feel that Scales handles removal much better than Hammer, and it can grind much better, especially if we have the new Cauldron. And I feel that in the future we'll see more Scales.
I think Scales handles small cards better, like Bolt and Heat, but it handles large cards much worse, like Brotherhood's End, or those like 3 to 4 mana Shatterstorm adjacent effects. So whenever Scales become popular, people will just put them into their sideboards. But yeah, I think Scales is like Scales also get a lot of equity from being a very tricky deck to both play and play against. If you never played against Scales and you don't like read about it and stuff, it's very likely that you will mess up a lot and you will just die. It's a very tricky deck this way.
Yeah. The biggest problem, in my opinion, for the deck is that it's filled with 2-drops. And because of it, it can be quite slow.
Yes, especially if we are on the draw.
Yeah, especially like after you added the Cauldron, after you added the Ozolid the Shattered Spire from
March of Machines.
Yeah.
And Patchwork Automaton last year also a 2-drop. You just have all 2-drops. You just cut those Arcbound Workers and Welding Jars and other like cheaper cards in place of more 2-drops, which just is not very good for your curve.
The curve of the deck struggles. I wonder how good the deck would be with Mox Opal, but
I don't think you have the density of artifacts.
I think you do. I think you don't have any other problems with Mox Opal being good, especially with Welding Jars as
but the way you want to use Mox, you want to have 2 mana on turn 1. You won't have 2 mana on turn 1 with this deck.
Yeah, true.
That's the problem. Like that's the big problem. You want to play your 2-drop on turn 1. And Mox was never that good at playing 2-drop on turn 1. It was better at playing like 2 1-drops on turn 1. Or if you have 0 drops, okay, you could have played Ravager or Plating turn 1, but you need to have like 8 zeros or more than 8 zeros for that, and you don't want zeros in this deck. Maybe you want Welding Jars, but you don't want 0 mana creatures because they are garbage.
Okay, let's not waste time about Mox Opal. Scales. Tricky. I expect it to go.
Yeah, I think if you're Scales main, then it's a good time to play Scales.
Yes, I like it.
Okay, Titan Shift?
Yes.
I don't understand Titan Shift. It's basically not Nathan of Guild Leaf winning with this deck a bit on Modo. And yeah, I just don't get it. it's not good against Murktide. It's
You don't need to be good versus Murktide to have a solid deck in a format.
Yeah, but it's also not good versus Scam, I think.
It's a one ring deck that plays
Okay.
one ring on turn 3. So
That makes sense. Okay.
Quite often. So this is the reason, in my opinion, what made the deck better. Also, the addition of Wish made you losing to other random stuff not that problematic because you can find answers. Overall, it's a very similar position to Burn and Mill. It's an exploit deck versus.
It is kind of an exploit deck, yes.
It will be quite good versus 4-color being on the rise.
Yes, because it doesn't rely on non-land permanents, yes.
Yeah. And the last one, Blue-Black Ring.
Oh, yeah.
I feel it's a story about people trying new cards and then realizing that they created something that just worse compared to what was already created.
I think it was a deck for Murktide mains to play when Murktide was bad, because a lot of people who used to play Murktide played this deck because it was kind of similar-ish. But now, with Preordain, Murktide just get more from Preordain than Ring. And also, it was a deck with lowest win percentage out of all those decks presented on the list. I just don't think it's a very good deck.
Yeah, sadly. Like, it looked quite good. It was the combination of the One Ring and Bowmasters. So it was a new hotness in the town. But,
it matches up really well against 4-color. Because both Force of Negation and Subtlety are very good against 4-color. So that part of the deck was important. But it also, it's just a flawed deck, I think, in general. So, you have to play Shieldred's Edict, and if you listen to Gabriel Nassif, he'll tell you that Shieldred's Edict is great. But don't believe his lies. Don't believe his lies. It's very embarrassing card to have in your deck, I think.
In my opinion, it's quite good. Like, the fact that you always kill something relevant, not random tokens, is a good thing.
All right.
Also, it's a black answer to Planeswalkers. So
yeah, that's true.
Okay. Overall, the list. Can you read it once again, please?
So, to sum it up, we have A tier, Scam, 4-color control, Amulet, Rhinos, Yawgmoth, Murktide. B tier, Living End, Tron, Burn, Mill, Jan Saga, Coffers, and Creativity. And C tier, Hammer, Scales, Titan Shift, and Blue-Black Ring. Overall, I've been enjoying this iteration of Modern.
I don't.
Very back and forth format, a lot of close games and fairly enticing gameplay, a lot of decisions, a lot of back and forth. It's just what good players back in the day wanted Modern to be.
That was so rude. From my perspective, it's an endless card advantage fiesta that I don't like, or like a value fiesta. Let's say.
That's very, very shallow way of putting things.
Yeah, we don't have that much time to say more. Like, I don't want to talk about 10 minutes about why I like having linear combo decks in the format and why I think they are important.
Yep.
I just don't feel that.
It's not like Amulet is in A tier and Living End is at the top of the B tier, and you have those combo decks.
It's not the level of non-interactive decks I would like to see. Like, it's.
So you're just upset that you can't storm people or belcher people.
Yeah, or dredge people, or like do things that like. It's just not it, I would like to.
Okay.
Close my eyes and do my thing and not
we'll
stuff. Right?
We'll see you again with those updates in 6 weeks. Maybe in those 6 weeks, Sodek will clarify his mind on what he doesn't like about this format, and in 6 weeks you will learn exactly why Dredge being the best deck in the format is great for everybody.
I have Living End and Burn covered already. The next, let's say, linear deck from the list is Tron, and I will most likely play it now and see how it goes.
It's a good deck finally, Sodek. So, not Tron is finally good, but finally you have a good deck to play. Okay, As always, thanks so much for watching our content. All the links are in the description below. And yeah, we'll focus on Pioneer now with the RC coming in 3 weeks. So expect some. I'll definitely play a lot of Phoenix, and I'll write about Phoenix for Mystical Teachings. Sodek, who knows?
Most likely Convoke.
We'll know in a brief time. So yeah, thanks for watching as always. Take care and bye bye.
See ya.